The village of Bayo, carved into the brittle bones of a red, cracked hill, was not a place for mercy. The sun there did not shine, it stared. The wind did not whisper, it scraped. Every path through the village was lined with dry stalks of maize and harder hearts. Justice, as they called it, came swift and loud, and once a verdict was spoken, no voice dared to challenge it. And on the edge of that scorched world stood a girl with eyes too quiet and a soul too large for the smallness of Bayo's fear. Her name was Nia. Just Nia. No father's name, no mother's praise. Only her grandmother had ever dared to hold her close and say, "You are born of silence and starlight, and they will never understand you." The old woman had been buried beneath a tamarind tree, and the village had exhaled in relief when the girl was left alone. Strange children grow stranger when untended. But Nia grew not wild but inward. Her hands learned the patterns of leaf veins, the way smoke curled toward those who lied, the murmur of fire in the hearth. She listened more than she spoke. She watched. And in a village like Bayo, where men feared what they could not name, a girl who listened became dangerous. When the rains failed, they looked to her. When goats were born with twisted legs, they blamed her eyes. When the chief's son fell ill with night sweats and woke screaming, they whispered her name. She had never touched him, never cursed, never pleaded. She had only walked through the market one morning and paused by the herbalist's stall, long enough, they claimed, to slip a curse into his breath. The trial was swift. A circle formed beneath the tree where her grandmother lay, and elders, with faces like folded leather, spoke in tones too heavy for truth. Her accusers spat their words with righteous fire. "She walks with the wind," said one. "She speaks to bones," said another. The final blow came from a woman who once begged Nia for herbs to help her conceive. "She made my child vanish before it quickened." It did not matter that the woman had been too old. It did not matter that Nia had said nothing. She did not scream. She did not weep. She only stood, small and still, her long hands clenched at her sides. The judgment was clear: exile to the Hill of Bones. It was a place beyond the third ridge, where the earth was chalky and the air refused to carry sound. There, on a plateau scabbed with old sun-bleached skeletons, the condemned were left for the vultures. It was an ancient punishment, one reserved for the worst: murderers, blasphemers, those who defied the order of things. The vultures, the elders believed, could smell evil. They only descended upon those whose souls were already foul. If they refused to feed, then the soul was innocent and the village had erred. But they never erred. Or so they said. 2 men dragged Nia to the ridge with ropes around her wrists. She did not fight. Her eyes were clear, her skin dry from days of no water, her feet bleeding slightly from where they had stripped her sandals away. As they reached the base of the hill, one of the men, Mako, a young hunter who had once shared a fig with her under the moon, paused. His jaw tightened. She looked at him, and something in her silence made him step away quickly. At the top, they tied her hands behind her back and left her there beneath the eye of the sun. They said no words as they descended. There was no farewell for the wicked. And then she was alone. The vultures came at dusk as they always did. First, a single cry tore the sky, circling. Then a dozen. Then dozens. Their wings beat like cloaks of the dead. They swooped low, casting shadows over her curled form. She did not tremble. She only watched. The oldest among the village remembered an old song, one their own elders had once sung, of a girl left for the vultures who was spared because her soul was made of moonlight. That girl, the legend said, rose with the birds and vanished into the sky, her body untouched. But that was a child's tale. Justice was real. The dead stayed dead. Yet below the hill, where a few daring villagers crept at twilight to see if the feast had begun, there was nothing but silence. The vultures circled, but they did not land. Instead they screamed. And high on the hill, with ropes that should have held her tight, Nia sat upright, untied. A breeze, cold and unfamiliar, swept through the scorched air, carrying the scent of tamarind and smoke. They fed her to the vultures. But the vultures had refused. Before the village turned its eyes on Nia with suspicion and fire, her life was one of quiet threads, small, sacred moments woven with care and mystery. She had not been born into love, but she had found it, fierce and unyielding, in the arms of her grandmother, Moma Didi. Didi was a midwife, a keeper of songs too old for drums and prayers too soft for temples. She was the kind of woman who knew when the river would flood by the way frogs croaked in the fields, who listened to bees and told stories to the moon. And Nia, from her earliest steps, walked in her shadow. They lived on the village's edge, just past the well with the broken stone and near the fig tree where lovers sometimes left offerings. Their hut was simple, mud walls, a thatched roof always under repair, but it held warmth. A warmth of cloves drying on the windowsill, of smoked fish and quiet laughter, of whispers under woven blankets as Didi taught her granddaughter the ancient ways. Not magic, she'd say, just memory. The kind of remembering the earth respects. Nia absorbed everything. By 10 she could sort herbs not only by their smell and color, but by their mood. She knew which leaf to boil for fever, which root to chew for courage, and which flower opened only when a lie was near. The villagers came quietly at first. A bruised woman in the night, a mother who could not carry, a hunter whose dreams were haunted. They brought gifts of salt and palm oil, and Didi always asked for nothing but truth. But wisdom, when held in the hands of a girl, can look like fire to those who live in fear. And Nia, she was becoming too bright. She was kind always. She helped mend baskets at the market, played with children too small for chores, offered her food to the old. But she had her grandmother's eyes, dark, patient, too still. People would speak and then falter as if they felt exposed. She knows things, they would say, meaning it as both praise and warning. Even the chief's wife once said, half in jest, "That girl sees through bone." There were those who watched her with envy. Wives whose husbands came for poultices, herbalists whose remedies failed while hers thrived, girls who admired her braid work but resented how quickly children flocked to her stories. And beneath it all, a darker current, fear of her lineage. Moma Didi had once been called before the village elders many years ago. A birth had gone wrong, and though Didi had saved the child, the mother bled too long and died before the cock crowed. They accused her of meddling with spirits. But she had stood tall, quiet as always, and said only, "I do not command the wind. I only know when it comes." The elders, too proud to admit their ignorance, had let her be, but they never forgot. And so, when Didi passed and Nia was left alone in that same hut, the silence grew thicker. They no longer came for healing. They whispered instead. The same kindness that once drew them near now became suspicion. Too kind, they said. Too quiet. An empty space grew between her and the village. A space Nia filled with her grandmother's rituals, talking to plants, burying wishes in the soil, reading the shapes of dying leaves. One day something shifted. A child, the chief's daughter, had been sick for days. Fever, red eyes trembling. The healer could do nothing. The mother came at night, clutching the girl and pleading. Nia opened the door. She brewed a bitter broth, wrapped the child in banana leaves, sang an old chant Didi had used. By morning the fever broke. The girl's mother left without a word. Days later she claimed the sickness had vanished on its own. She warned others not to go to Nia. "That girl is strange," she said. "The spirits follow her." Then came the drought. The sun burned without pause. Crops curled and died. A boy drowned trying to draw water from the deep well. A mother miscarried in her sleep. And the village, like a coiled snake, needed someone to strike. The betrayal came from the least expected lips. A friend, once close, once braided her hair by the river and shared mango slices with her. Tuma. Sweet Tuma, whose laughter always came like bells. She claimed Nia had cursed her womb. That she could no longer carry because she once stepped in Nia's shadow. "I didn't realize it then," she wept before the elders, "but now I see." She watches. She waits. And then things break. No one asked why she had once begged Nia for fertility herbs. No one questioned why she carried no grief before the drought. Truth was already drowning in the well. The villagers needed thunder, and Nia had always carried storm clouds in her silence. But beneath their fear, some still hesitated. Old Nana Ro, who had watched Didi's burial with trembling lips, had whispered to her neighbor, "That girl is her grandmother's blood. The earth won't eat her easy." Even Mako, the young hunter with calloused palms, looked down when her name was shouted. He said nothing, neither in defense nor accusation. That silence, to Nia, was the sharpest betrayal. And yet, as she stood in the circle of elders, her heart did not beat with fear. It beat with clarity. Because Didi had warned her of this, of what happened to women who remembered too much. One day, she had said, "They will ask you to forget who you are. And when you do not, they will try to erase you." But there was something in Nia's blood that could not be erased. So they dragged her to the Hill of Bones, believing they were feeding the vultures a girl. But the vultures would see the truth. And that would change everything. The Hill of Bones had many names, most of which were whispered. To outsiders, it was just a rise of scorched earth and cracked rock high above the riverbanks, where nothing grew and nothing rested. But to the villagers who lived in its shadow, it was a place of endings. The condemned were not buried there. They were delivered, alive, to the birds. From a distance it looked harmless enough. A brown swell rising from the plains, dotted with dry grass and the occasional thorn bush. But when one got closer, the signs began to speak. Bleached bones half sunken into the soil. Ragged scraps of cloth fluttering from gnarled branches. The sharp, acrid smell of death mixed with the iron scent of old blood. And always the vultures, circling above in black spirals as though the sky itself bore a curse. No one came here willingly. Even hunters avoided its paths. Even goats turned their heads when passing near. Only the exile procession ever climbed it, and they did so with solemn steps, never looking back. Long before Nia, the hill had devoured dozens. Some were murderers. Others were thieves. A few had been merely unlucky. A widow whose husband vanished, a midwife whose infant patient died, a traveler whose tongue was too clever. The hill did not judge, but the people did. And once the elders pronounced exile, there was no reversal. The hill took what it was given. Children were taught to never speak the names of those left behind. It was said their souls wandered the slope, unable to pass, watching for the ones who had turned away. And worse still, the legend of the vultures. These were no ordinary birds. Black-feathered and red-eyed, they had lived on the hill long before the village was born. Some claimed they were once humans, spirits of ancient warriors cursed to feast on flesh. Others said they were messengers of the underworld, feeding only on the guilty, sparing the innocent by turning away. The elders never confirmed either tale, but they never denied them either. And in silence they always watched the birds. It was a heavy silence that clung to the village the day of Nia's exile. The kind of silence that made even dogs stop barking. No drums were played. No cries were raised. Only a horn was sounded, long and hollow, like the breath of something old and dying. Nia was led to the center of the village, wrists bound, eyes wide but dry. She did not beg. She did not scream. She looked to the sky, to where the vultures had already begun their spirals, and then to the people. Faces turned away. Tuma was among them, head bowed, hands clutching a red shawl, one Nia had given her seasons ago. Mako was nowhere to be seen. The elders walked ahead. 4 men and 2 women, wrapped in ceremonial cloths, each carrying a staff adorned with bones of animals. Behind them, Nia was flanked by 2 strong villagers, silent enforcers of judgment. Children were kept indoors. Doors were bolted. It was as though the village itself wished to forget this part of itself. The climb was not long, but it felt eternal. The sun blazed overhead, unforgiving, and the ground grew harsher with each step. Sharp stones cut her bare feet, and the dry wind carried dust into her mouth and eyes. Still she did not cry. She only listened. The vultures were calling. Their cries were low, guttural croaks. Not the shrill scream of hawks, but a hungry, ancient rasp, like the earth calling for its due. They circled slowly at first, then faster, tighter. As if recognizing the one who approached. At the hill's peak, a crude wooden post stood surrounded by cracked bones and black feathers. It was stained with the history of the exiled, rusty brown streaks trailing down its surface. There were rope fragments still tied to it. Pieces of former lives, once screaming, now forgotten. This is where they tied Nia. They bound her hands above her head, wrists fastened tightly behind the post so that her chest faced the sun. Her ankles were tied as well, her knees forced to bend just enough to keep her unsteady. The heat scorched her skin. The wood bit into her back. But she did not scream. The elders said nothing to her. They never did. That was the rule. Once the condemned were tied, they were no longer part of the living. Words given to them might be carried to the other side. So they simply turned, robes billowing, and began their descent. When the last footstep vanished behind the slope, the silence came. It was not true silence. The wind whispered. The bird screeched. Her heart thudded like a war drum. But it was a different kind of silence. One that came when the world itself turned away. Even the sky seemed to press heavier against her, lowering like a curtain between life and death. Nia stood beneath the sun for hours. Her lips cracked. Her eyes burned. The ropes cut into her skin. Her legs trembled. She thought of water, of cool shade, of the taste of roasted plantain and the feel of her grandmother's hands in her hair. And the vultures circled. One landed. A large one with a hooked beak and a torn wing. It waddled toward her, tilting its head, eyes glistening like hot stones. Nia met its gaze. Another landed. Then a third. Soon the ground was alive with rustling wings and clicking talons. They did not screech. They did not peck. They only watched. Nia blinked against the sun, vision blurring. Sweat stung the cuts on her back. The birds came closer. One extended its neck and let out a soft, guttural growl. Another followed suit. A third brushed its wing against her ankle. Still they did not bite. And then one did something strange. It bowed. Its entire body lowered, wings spread wide, head ducking to the earth. A moment later the others followed. One by one the vultures bowed to the girl tied to the post. A procession of black feathers and crimson beaks, paying homage. And Nia, through the haze of pain and heat, remembered a story her grandmother once told. There is a hill where birds do not eat flesh but read it. They see the truth that skin cannot hide. If you are false they will strip you. If you are true they will wait. Wait for what? She had asked. But Didi had only smiled. Now, as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the hill, the vultures began to cry, not with hunger but with something that sounded like mourning. A low, rhythmic keening that echoed into the wind and rolled down to the village below. The villagers heard. Some turned their heads. Others pressed palms to their hearts. Nia hung limp now, her knees buckled, her head resting against the post. But her eyes remained open. The birds moved closer, not to tear but to guard. By nightfall she was still breathing. The stars came, silent and watchful. The vultures did not leave. They surrounded her in a loose circle, wings tucked, eyes alert. And down in the village, unease began to stir. Because never before had the vultures refused. Never before had the hill of bones been defied. Some said it was a sign. Others said it was a mistake. A few, in hushed tones, said the girl must be protected. But no one dared go up the hill. Not yet. Because the hill had taken and now it seemed, it was giving back. At dawn the hill of bones shimmered with a strange, silver mist. Not the soft fog of river mornings or the dust clouds kicked up by the dry season, but something denser, colder. It clung low to the earth and hugged the base of the post where Nia had been tied. The air around the hill felt thick, like breath held too long. The vultures had encircled her all through the night, feathers tucked and eyes open. Not one had taken a single bite. They had watched. They had waited. And when the sun's first light painted the ridge in gold, they began to stir, not to feed but to flee. It began with a single cry, sharp and shrill, slicing the silence like a spear. One of the vultures lifted its head, wings unfurling in a sudden violent snap. Then another. And another. Their black bodies leaped into the air, wings slapping the dry wind. A whirl of feathers stormed the sky. But it wasn't just flight, it was refusal. Their circling was chaotic now, frantic even. As if repelled by something they could not see but deeply felt. They no longer looked at Nia. They looked beyond her, through her. Their cries rose in chorus, echoing across the village and sending animals into frenzied motion. Goats bolted from pens. Dogs whined and cowered. Even the river seemed to hush. From the edge of the village, a boy named Tano dared to climb a tree for a better view. He squinted through the morning haze, heart pounding. What he saw chilled him. The vultures were not circling for food. They were performing a ritual. A dance. Their wings slashed the sky in spirals. Their cries came in rhythm. Each motion felt heavy, deliberate. And in the center of their frenzy, on that cracked hill of bone and sun, the girl remained upright. Still bound. But she was watching them now. Nia's eyes were open, bright with something deeper than life. Her skin, once pale from exhaustion, now glowed faintly. Not with health but with something otherworldly. Something that made the vulture scream. Her chest rose and fell in slow, unnatural rhythm, as if her breath no longer belonged to lungs but to something deeper. A shudder rolled across the land. Darkness began to ripple across the sky. Not clouds, no. Not a storm. The blue turned gray in patches, like bruises blossoming across the heavens. Birds in the forest flew the opposite direction. Even the wind changed. It no longer swept gently through the grass but halted altogether, as though the world had paused, watching. Nia tilted her head back and in that instant something happened. The ropes snapped. No knife touched them. No hands worked their knots. They simply fell. As though they had forgotten their purpose. As if the cords themselves understood they had bound something that could no longer be contained. She collapsed forward, knees hitting the earth. Her palms dug into dry soil. Dust rose around her in slow spirals. She did not weep. She did not cry out. She pressed her forehead into the ground and let out a breath that echoed with a sound not fully human. Then she stood. Tano saw it, clear as daylight. She stood like someone born again but heavier. Like she carried not only her own soul but others with her. Her movements were slow and certain. And when she looked toward the village even from that far, he swore she looked directly at him. He fell from the tree. Others too were watching now, from door cracks behind half-open shutters, through the slats of cattle pens. The rumors had spread fast, she's still alive. The birds didn't eat her. The hill rejected the sacrifice. But no one said it loud. No one dared use her name. Back on the hill, the vultures had changed formation. They no longer flew in chaos but now formed a widening spiral, a vortex of feathers and fury. Their cries became rhythmic, almost like chants. Some villagers whispered they heard words in the wind. Old words. Forbidden names. A language of ancestors long buried. And in the eye of that storm stood Nia, arms loose by her sides, her hair whipping in the breeze that returned only to surround her. The sky grew darker still. A thick gloom rolled in from nowhere, swallowing the hill's crown. It wasn't nightfall but something older than night. A darkness without stars. The birds screamed louder. Some villagers covered their ears. One woman fainted. And then the mist came again, rising in coils from the earth, wrapping itself around Nia's ankles and lifting like a curtain until it danced at her waist. Shapes seemed to move within it, shadows, echoes, forms not fully formed. Faces that vanished when stared at. Hands that reached then dissolved. Nia began to walk. Each step left no footprint. Her body swayed as though to a song only she could hear. Her eyes were not her own. They gleamed with something distant, hollow and full all at once. The birds parted as she moved, clearing a path, bowing mid-flight. Not once did a feather touch her skin. And in the village, fear rooted itself. The elders gathered beneath the great baobab, their faces tight with dread. The oldest among them, Muti, whispered a word no one had spoken in generations. Kinyum, the one who is reversed. The one turned back by death. A being reborn not through time but through injustice. She was innocent, Muti said. And the hill knew it. Some wanted to run. Others wanted to pray. A few wanted to send her back up, to finish what they had begun. But none moved. None acted. Fear had rendered them still. And then came the scream. Not from the girl. From the sky. It tore through the clouds like a tear in fabric. A wail so high and long it made even the hills echo back in sorrow. The birds flared outward. The mist vanished. And all light drained from the world for a breathless heartbeat. When the light returned, Nia was no longer at the hill's peak. She was walking down its slope. Each step forward made the grass around her bow. Each breeze bent to her path. The birds did not follow now, they soared above, circling her like guardians. The sky remained bruised, dark, but parted above her, leaving a trail of pale light that moved as she did. She did not rush. She did not stumble. She moved with purpose. In the village, doors began to shut. Some fell to their knees. Others clutched charms and idols to their chests. One child pointed and said, "She's glowing." They were not wrong. Nia's skin bore the sheen of moonlight, though the sun remained hidden. Her feet no longer bled. Her eyes held no anger, no grief, only truth. Terrible, absolute truth. The truth of a soul returned, cleansed not by ritual but by fire. By betrayal. By a hill that had once taken many, but had returned only one. And as she crossed into the village's edge, even the insects went silent. A hush spread. The girl who had been fed to vultures had returned. And she brought with her not vengeance, but a reckoning the land itself had ordained. None dared meet her eyes. None dared speak. And still above the birds circled. Watching. Waiting. Not for death. But for justice. It was 3 days after the Hill of Bones had gone quiet. The villagers thought the strange events were over. They whispered and waited, holding their breath through restless nights, their dreams clouded by wings and cries that echoed from nowhere. Some thought they had imagined it all, the birds, the screams, the sky that bruised. Others swore they still saw vultures circling above the hill at dusk, motionless as sentinels carved into the clouds. But no one, not even the boldest of the youth, dared climb the path again. And then she came back. At dawn, the village gate creaked open, not from the wind but from a hand. The watchman, old Bako, had fallen asleep on his stool and awoke to the hush of footsteps. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he was still dreaming. But the figure standing in the entrance was real. Too real. Nia. Clothed in the same tattered robe they had sent her to die in. Her feet bare but unbloodied. Her skin marked not by sunburn or scars, but with a strange, silvery glow. Her hair hung in tangled curls, woven with leaves and dust. Her face, unchanged and yet different. The same eyes but deeper. So, as if they had seen past the veil of life and death and returned with silence as their only language. Above her, the vultures flew in perfect formation. 9 of them in a wide, slow arc. Not circling to feed. not swooping to scout. Just gliding, guarding. Their black wings cut the dawn light into shifting blades, casting long shadows that followed Nia like cloaks. Not a single one cried out. Not one made a sound. Bako did not speak. He did not move. He simply stood aside as the girl walked past him. Words spread like wind across dry grass. She's returned. Doors slammed. Children were yanked inside. Mothers clutched charms made of bone and feather, muttering old prayers they hadn't spoken in years. The elders gathered at the village center, robes half-tied, staffs in hand, eyes wide with disbelief and a touch of terror. Nia said nothing. She passed through the village like a ghost with weight. Her feet stirred the dust, but no sound echoed. No dog barked. No bird chirped. It was as if the land itself held its breath. Eyes peered from shutter cracks and thatched windows. Faces watched from behind spears and garden walls. Some villagers fell to their knees. Others ran to the temple, crying out to the ancestors. One woman fainted upon seeing the 9 shadows above the girl. She is not of this world, they said. She is the spirit of the hill. She walks with death on her shoulders. But no one stepped forward. Not one soul dared stop her path. She walked straight down the middle of the village, where children once played, where the market once bustled. Past the well where she used to draw water. Past the shrine where they had once given thanks for harvests. No glance to either side. Just forward. Measured. Controlled. Unafraid. Behind her, silence. Before her, fear. A few called out, trembling voices breaking under their own uncertainty. Nia? Are you? But she never looked their way. She paused only once, before the home of Elder Maru, the man who had delivered her sentence. The vultures shifted their pattern above her. The sky darkened slightly as if a shadow passed behind the sun. Elder Maru peered from within his doorway, his hand gripping a staff that now shook. His voice was hoarse. You should be dead. Still Nia said nothing. Her gaze met his, and in that moment he gasped, as though something ancient had crawled into his chest. His hand dropped the staff. His knees gave. He sat in the dust, lips moving with prayers long forgotten. The girl watched him for 3 heartbeats. Then she moved on. Toward the tree line. Toward the path that led to the river where her grandmother used to gather healing roots. Toward memory. Toward truth. And as she walked, the vultures shifted again, widening their circle, drifting lower. Some villagers shouted to the gods. Some wept. A few whispered that perhaps she was not cursed, but chosen. Perhaps the vultures had not refused to eat her because she was tainted, but because she was too sacred for the earth to consume. She walks like a storm with eyes. She carries justice on her back. She is a question we don't dare answer. Days would pass and the village would remain restless. No one knew where she slept. No one saw her eat. She would appear at dawn and vanish before dusk, always silent, always watched by her winged shadows. Some tried to follow her once. They returned wide-eyed, speaking of strange winds and mirrors in the woods. Others said she disappeared mid-step, swallowed by air that shimmered like heat. But none who saw her walk ever forgot. And above it all, the vultures flew. Not circling to kill. Circling to protect. Or perhaps to bear witness. No one expected them to stay. When the girl returned, it was the sight of her that unstrung the village's courage. But it was the vultures that truly unraveled the people's sleep. At first they thought the birds would vanish once she did. When Nia disappeared into the woods on that first day, her bare feet fading into the shadows of the trees, many believed it would be the last they'd hear of the creatures that had circled her. But the next morning they were there, perched along rooftops, atop the temple steeple, and on the twisted boughs of the old tree in the village square. 9 vultures. Always 9. They did not squawk or screech. They made no nests, not at first. They simply waited. Perched like carved idols, their eyes black and blinking, their wings tight to their sides as though conserving a storm. Every home, every hut, every garden had at least one pair of eyes upon it. No one knew when they arrived each day. No one saw them land. They were just there, watching. The children were the first to sense it. They stopped playing in the open. They no longer sang songs while grinding maize or fetching water. Their laughter, once the heartbeat of the village, faded into quiet mutters and the dragging of small feet. Mothers began hanging charms over their doorways, bones of fish, feathers dipped in oil, bits of cloth stitched with grandmother prayers. At night, the village pulsed with unease. Dogs refused to bark. Chickens stopped laying eggs. Fires burned low, and when the wind blew through the trees, it carried with it not the scent of flowers or earth, but the dry, sour trace of feathers and distant decay. Dreams changed. They started with murmurs. Soft at first, like whispers through closed windows. Some villagers heard their names spoken by voices that did not belong to anyone living. Others said they felt a presence sitting at the edge of their beds, unmoving, breathless, watching. Then came the dreams of the girl. In one dream, a farmer saw Nia standing at the foot of the hill of bones, her eyes closed, the vultures behind her forming a circle of wings. She pointed to him without opening her eyes, and the next morning, he found his crops blackened and twisted. In another, a young mother dreamed of Nia walking through her house, each step leaving footprints of bloodless ash. When she awoke, the mirror in her hut had cracked across its surface, and her baby would not stop crying until dawn. Elder Maru, the man who had cast the sentence upon Nia, became a ghost of himself. He no longer left his home. His skin lost its color, and his eyes remained red from sleepless nights. He claimed he saw her in every shadow, not just in dreams but waking moments, her face reflected in bowls of water, in polished wood, even in the sheen of his own tears. He began carving symbols into his walls, muttering about balance disrupted and judgment delayed. The vultures did not leave. Instead they grew bolder. They began circling in daylight, slow and low, just above the rooftops. Some hovered over wells. Others perched in trees that had never borne birds before. Their presence drew more than fear, it sparked questions. Why hadn't they left? What did they want? Some said they were protectors, watching to ensure no more innocents would be condemned. Others whispered they were eyes for something else, something waiting to pass its own judgment upon the village. There were those who believed the vultures were not birds at all but spirits in feathered disguise, drawn not to the girl herself, but to what she had become. Old Nana Woob, the oldest woman in the village who hadn't spoken in years, began muttering stories again. She has walked where death sleeps, she said one night, her cloudy eyes staring into the fire. And the birds, they know the scent of truth. They do not eat her because she is not for eating. She is for remembering. Some villagers tried to drive the vultures away. They threw stones, lit fires on the rooftops, even fired arrows into the air. The vultures did not flinch. No matter the noise, no matter the flames, they stayed. When one man struck a bird with a sling, the vulture fell from the air in silence, then vanished before it hit the ground. The man's roof caved in that night during a windless hour. He left the village the next morning without saying a word. And still the birds remained. More stories spread. A group of children, ignoring their mother's warnings, dared each other to stare at the birds from atop the water tower. When they returned, they were silent and pale. They would not say what they had seen. That night, all three drew identical spirals on the walls of their homes. They never played again. Others began to act strangely. One woman was found at midnight speaking to a vulture perched on her fence, offering it pieces of bread and reciting old folk tales as if soothing a child. A hunter claimed he had heard the birds speak, not in words, but in emotions that pushed directly into his chest. They know everything, he said wide-eyed. They don't need mouths to speak. But not all feared them. A few villagers began leaving offerings outside their homes, bowls of water, cuts of raw meat, prayers scratched into clay. They hoped to appease whatever force had taken residence above them. Some even whispered thanks. Let them watch, they said. Let them see our honesty. But others were not so accepting. At night, strange chants were heard deep in the forest, where those desperate to cleanse their guilt sought otherworldly help. Strange footprints appeared in the fields, three-toed, wide as plates. Some said the vultures were no longer just messengers. They were harbingers. And still the dreams continued. One boy claimed that in his dream he stood on the hill of bones with Nia. She held a mirror, and in it he saw himself, aging rapidly, then rotting, then gone. She told me to remember who I am, he whispered the next day. But I don't know who that is anymore. People began to speak of leaving. Others insisted they stay and atone. But no one knew what to atone for. It had been too easy to blame her, the girl with the herbs, the quiet words, the knowledge passed through matrilineal whispers. Too easy to label her a witch when the elder's son fell ill. Too easy to look away when her grandmother's home was burned down. Too easy to bind her wrists and lead her to the hill. The vultures stayed to remember what the villagers tried to forget. And so the village lived beneath wings. Shadows that never left. A silence that hummed. A past that refused to be buried. And above every roof, a watchful presence waited, not with hunger but with purpose. The air in the village grew heavier with each passing day, thick with fear and suspicion. What began as quiet whispers behind closed doors soon blossomed into a palpable tension that clenched at the hearts of all who lived there. The vultures remained unwavering sentinels above every roof, their black eyes like endless pits of judgment. But something else was creeping into the village, something far more insidious: guilt. Those who had raised their voices against Nia, who had condemned her to death on the Hill of Bones, began to falter. At first it was small things: an old man's cough that refused to heal, a young woman's fever that bloomed overnight. Then more severe symptoms surfaced: crippling headaches, trembling hands, and in some cases madness. The healer, a man who once scoffed at Nia's knowledge, found himself unable to cure the ailments that gripped his neighbors. It was as if the very air was poisoned with remorse. The villagers grew restless, dividing themselves into factions. On one side were those who clung to fear, insisting that the girl had returned as a curse, a dark spirit sent to punish the village for its sins. They demanded that she be driven away or destroyed before more damage was done. On the other were the quiet voices of those who remembered Nia's kindness, who believed that the true evil lay not in the girl but in the betrayal that had led to her exile. They sought forgiveness, both from Nia and from whatever forces now hovered ominously over their homes. As days turned into nights, long-buried secrets began to surface, brought forth like ghosts awakened by the vulture's shadow. In the dim light of flickering lanterns, hushed conversations revealed the fractures beneath the village's surface, fractures that had been hidden by fear and silence for years. There was the story of old Jima, a man known for his greed. It was whispered that he had stolen from the communal granary, blaming the losses on Nia's supposed witchcraft to divert suspicion. When his crops failed suddenly and without reason, many nodded knowingly. Karma, they said. The vulture's curse. Then there was Mara, the blacksmith's wife, who had lied about seeing Nia perform dark rituals near the sacred river. Her accusations had fueled the fire that led to Nia's condemnation, but now her husband lay paralyzed, his body twisted and unresponsive. The village murmured that the punishment had come swift and unforgiving. Even the elders, the pillars of tradition and justice, were not spared. Secrets leaked about hidden debts, forbidden love affairs, and alliances forged in darkness. One elder was caught stealing sacred relics, another found guilty of withholding grain during a famine. The villagers realized with a shudder that the lines between victim and villain were blurred. The stepfather of the village's chieftain, once a staunch supporter of Nia's punishment, withdrew from public life after suffering violent fits that left him shaking on the ground. His wife, the chieftain's mother, confessed in tears that she had forced Nia's grandmother to reveal ancient spells, not to protect the village but to control it. Superstition grew alongside the guilt. The villagers began to see signs everywhere: broken branches shaped like hands reaching, shadows that moved against the sun, the distant cry of a single vulture piercing the silence just before a misfortune. They carried talismans and charms, repeated prayers at dawn and dusk, and avoided looking into mirrors altogether. The old proverb, "Know thy reflection, or it shall know you too well," took on new meaning, whispered with fear. One night, a gathering was called in the village square, illuminated only by torches and the pale moon. The village elders and spiritual leaders spoke of rituals to appease the spirits of the wronged. They urged confession and reconciliation, calling for honesty as the only path to peace. Yet many resisted, their hearts hardened by fear and the need to protect themselves from blame. Among the crowd, a young woman stepped forward, Lena, a friend of Nia's from childhood. She spoke of the girl's true nature, her healing hands, her gentle heart, the wisdom she carried from her grandmother's teachings. Lena begged the village to seek forgiveness, to recognize the pain they had inflicted on an innocent soul. Her words stirred some, but many still looked away, unwilling to face their own culpability. Behind closed doors, the chieftain struggled with his conscience. Torn between loyalty to his family and the truth he now glimpsed, he began questioning the foundation of his authority. He sought the advice of the village seer, who revealed a troubling vision. The village could only survive if it cleansed itself of the darkness festering within. That darkness was not Nia, but the lies, the betrayals, and the cruelty that had poisoned their community. The division in the village deepened. Those who wished to expel Nia or the vultures clashed with those who wanted healing and restitution. Arguments turned to threats. Old friends became enemies. The village that once moved as one now fractured into uneasy camps, each haunted by their own fears and secrets. In the midst of this turmoil, strange occurrences increased. Some villagers claimed to hear Nia's voice carried on the wind, soft and sorrowful, calling for justice and peace. Others reported seeing fleeting glimpses of a faceless figure moving silently among the trees, followed by the unmistakable shadow of a vulture. The boundary between the natural and supernatural blurred, feeding the villagers' paranoia and wonder. But perhaps the most unsettling were the dreams. More villagers awoke screaming, recounting visions of themselves reflected in cracked mirrors, faces distorted, eyes hollow, trapped behind glass. They saw the faces of those they had wronged, silent but accusing. These dreams brought no comfort, only dread and sleepless nights. As the village unraveled, the vultures remained a constant presence. They did not attack, did not steal, did not speak, but their very being was a reminder. A living monument to the consequences of injustice and the price of secrets. And amidst the chaos, the question lingered like a shadow at dusk. Would the village find the courage to face its own darkness, or would it be consumed by it, swallowed whole by guilt and superstition, as the vultures watched silently from above? The answer lay somewhere in the breaking silence, waiting for someone brave enough to seek it. The storm gathered swiftly, dark clouds rolling over the village like a shroud, swallowing the fading light of dusk. Thunder growled in the distance, a warning that nature itself was unsettled. The villagers, who had long since been gripped by fear and suspicion, now found themselves immobilized by a deeper dread. For tonight was the night the girl, the one they had fed to the vultures, was to speak. She appeared silently at the edge of the village, draped in shadows but steady and unbroken. The vultures circled overhead, their wings beating against the heavy air as if carried by the very storm itself. They did not screech or swoop in attack, but instead descended gradually, settling on rooftops, fence posts, and branches, silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. The villagers gathered in the center square, the spot where judgment had once been cast, now transformed into a crucible of truth. Some trembled, clutching each other for comfort, others turned their faces away, unwilling to meet the eyes of the girl who was supposed to be dead. Yet no one dared to leave. The storm pressed on, its rhythm echoing the pounding hearts of all present. At last the girl stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was soft but carried the weight of storms and centuries. "I have waited in silence," she said, "but the time for silence is over." She spoke not only with words but with a power that rippled through the air, silencing the restless wind for a moment, as if the very elements hung on her every syllable. One by one she named those who had betrayed her, the greed-driven, the jealous, the liars and the fearful. Each name landed like a stone thrown into still water, rippling through the crowd and stirring old wounds and fresh fears. Eyes widened, breaths caught in throats, and some faces paled as guilt rose like a tide. The girl's voice did not waver, it held no anger, only a fierce, resolute justice. The vultures shifted, spreading their wings wide as if in acknowledgement, and the sky darkened further. Lightning cracked open the heavens, illuminating the faces of the villagers with an unforgiving brilliance. The storm was no longer merely weather, it was a reckoning, a cleansing fire waiting to burn away the lies and sins buried beneath years of silence. Then, without warning, a sudden blaze erupted near the edge of the village. Flames licked at the dry grass, crackling and dancing, fed by a wind that seemed almost sentient. The fire spread swiftly, hungry and relentless, sparing no shadow or secret. The villagers scrambled to contain it, but the fire was no ordinary blaze. It moved with purpose, fueled by something far beyond mere wood and wind. As the fire raged, the vultures took flight in a swirling, thunderous storm above, their cries rising in a haunting chorus. They did not attack or devour, instead they circled protectively around the girl, who stood firm amidst the chaos, a beacon of calm. Within the inferno, some villagers vanished, consumed by the flames or swallowed by the darkness they had long hidden within. Others, marked by remorse and willingness to change, were spared. The fire seemed to know who was ready for cleansing and who was doomed to be consumed. As the night wore on, the storm gradually abated. The fire died to embers, and the vultures settled once again on silent wings. The village, scarred but reborn, was left with ashes and silence. The girl who should have been dead stood alone in the clearing, her eyes reflecting both the destruction and the promise of renewal. The villagers no longer whispered only in fear but in awe and repentance. They understood at last that the girl had not returned as a curse but as a reckoning, a chance to face their guilt and begin anew. And as dawn broke over the smoldering remains, the vultures took to the sky, their wings casting shadows like a blessing, or perhaps a warning, over the village that had been forever changed. Years stretched on like the endless sky above the village, changing seasons painting the landscape with hues of gold, green, and burnt amber. The fires of the past had cooled, but their memory never truly faded. The girl who had once been cast to the vultures and spared became something more than just a person. She became a legend woven deep into the fabric of village life, a story whispered by the wind and carried by the wings of the birds that had saved her. No longer simply the girl, she was now known as the Vulture Woman, a name both feared and revered, spoken carefully by parents when scolding their children, and murmured by elders as a reminder of justice, truth, and the power that lies beyond human sight. From the youngest toddlers to the oldest villagers, the tales of the Vulture Woman grew into a mosaic of mystery and meaning. Mothers would warn their children, "Don't tell lies or the Vulture Woman will hear you." Fathers cautioned their sons and daughters to respect the land and the skies, lest they awaken her watchful gaze. And the children, wide-eyed and trembling, would clutch their blankets tight, imagining the silent figure standing at the edge of the cliffs, eyes as sharp as the vultures that soared overhead. Some said she still lived in the village, walking unseen among the people, a guardian spirit cloaked in human form. Others claimed she had vanished entirely, returning to the cliffs where the vultures nested, a wild, untamable force bound to the wind and stone. There were whispers too that she was no longer separate from the birds at all, that her soul had merged with the flock, rising and falling with the wings that had spared her life. To look into the sky was to glimpse her presence, a shadow that drifted just beyond reach, a quiet sentinel watching over the land. The village itself transformed under her legacy. The wounds of betrayal and fear slowly healed as generations learned to honor truth and justice. Where once superstition had bred cruelty, now respect and caution flourished. The villagers built a small shrine at the edge of the cliffs, a place where offerings were left, feathers, stones and woven charms, to honor the Vulture Woman and seek her protection. Elders told stories around the fire, recounting the night when the vultures refused to feast, when the girl returned not as a victim but as a force that changed the fate of the village forever. These tales became lessons for the young, warnings against deceit and reminders of the unseen powers that govern life and death. Yet, the legacy of the Vulture Woman was not only one of fear or reverence, it was a story of transformation. The girl who had faced death and rejection embodied resilience and justice, becoming a symbol that even in the darkest moments, hope can take flight. Her survival was a testament to the strength of spirit, a reminder that sometimes, the greatest power lies not in destruction but in mercy. The cliffs where she was said to dwell became a place of pilgrimage. Villagers would journey there to leave gifts, to seek guidance in times of trouble, or simply to feel the presence of the woman who had bridged the realms of life and death. Some who visited spoke of strange sensations, a breeze that whispered secrets, shadows that moved like wings, or the sudden feeling of being watched by eyes unseen. Over time, artists and storytellers began to capture the essence of the Vulture Woman in song, dance, and carving. Masks adorned with feathers, paintings of a faceless figure surrounded by birds, and songs that told of the girl who defied death filled the cultural heart of the village. Her image became a symbol of both warning and protection, a dual force that reminded all to live with honesty and courage. But not all embraced the legend with open hearts. Some feared the power it held, whispering that the Vulture Woman was a curse rather than a blessing. They spoke in hushed tones of nights when the vultures seemed more restless, when shadows lengthened unnaturally, and when the wind carried voices that no human should hear. These fears only deepened the mystery, adding layers to the legend that grew with each telling. Yet, through all the myths and stories, one truth remained clear. The Vulture Woman was a part of the village, its past, its present, and its future. She was the living memory of justice denied and justice reclaimed, a spirit who taught that even when cast aside, the truth cannot be buried forever. As the sun set each evening, casting long shadows over the hills, the villagers would look to the sky and remember the girl who had walked with the vultures. They would listen for the distant cries, feel the wind's gentle touch, and know that somewhere beyond the cliffs, the Vulture Woman watched, a silent guardian of truth, a legacy carried on the wings of the wild. And so, the story of the Vulture Woman lived on, a haunting, powerful reminder that sometimes the most unexpected souls become the greatest legends, and that even those cast aside by the world can rise again, soaring above with the strength of 1,000 wings.